Well, Mr. Chairman, who hasn't yet come, and friends, I wish to start my presentation by thanking Professor Nathabat and the organizers of this program, and the Chancellor and the Vice Chancellor who were kind enough to invite me for this presentation. When I was informed of this conference, my knowledge of positive psychology was mainly based on whatever little work I knew about that was happening in our country. My impression was that it was related mainly to application of yoga, meditation, etc. in psychology. I mean, especially for stress management and treatment of other conditions. That's when I had to do some reading about positive psychology. Then I found that though positive psychology, as it was already discussed by many speakers, had many facets. It has a much wider, larger implication when it comes to explanation of human behavior. Then I found that it has taken me to several areas which are very close to me, and I found that there is a different way of looking at it. Well, the things that I am going to present, I would say that it is not necessary for you to know them at all for practicing positive psychology. You don't have to know this, because this speaks about a different contextual dimension of positive psychology. But as it is very often said, if you are a driver and you know how your car functions, you may drive your car more efficiently. If you know how your brain works, you may be able to use your brain more efficiently. You have to use your brain even without knowing how the brain works. That's a different thing. So in that manner, probably if you know some of these mechanisms, you may find that positive psychology has a much different application. Then I was going through some of the interesting examples of wherein I could find reference to positive psychology in history. Then I found that, these are very unusual examples. There is a reference to it, that type of positive psychology, in Mahabharata. When the Pandavas were invited by Duryodhana and his family for the the game of chess. Prior to that, Krishna was supposed to have gone and talked to Bhishma that he shall not interfere in this game. He will allow the game to go on as it should, because he wanted that to happen, whatever was to happen, and he found that that was the only way evil could be finally destroyed. Bhishma could have easily stopped that game, and he was asked to stay quiet. And you find in history, we playing this game over and over, hundreds of times, and even in the recent years, or even right now, we are playing similar games. Then there is another. You may wonder why I call it positive psychology. I will come to it reveal it. Another historical moment of expression of positive psychology. This is not from India. When Jesus Christ was slapped by someone on his cheek, he showed the other cheek. It was considered a very strange phenomenon. According to natural behavior of animals or behavior of human beings, there were only two options. that either you hit back, you run away from them. You have to either hit back or run away. Instead of that, he shows the other cheek. And then later years you find Mahatma Gandhi using that type of an approach, not once, umpteen number of times, and the love and respect of people. See, the outcome that is expected is not an immediate outcome. And which is, in this context, I found that there is a lot of work or literature on what we call free will, that human being is considered to have this option, this capacity or ability for free will. Then I found that even I have done quite a lot of work in that area, and there is a clear difference of opinion. Can I? Yeah. You find that free will has been the central theme of philosophy, religion, and to a much lesser extent even in science. The concept of free will has been always the center of philosophy. It's a concept which has been greatly debated and also misunderstood. The debate has been always between determinism and free will. I'll not go into determinism now. Anyway, there is a small reference. Determinism refers to the inevitable rule of the universe, where everything progresses in time according to the laws of nature. Future at any point is predetermined by the laws which control the progression of children. This is determinism. If you are familiar in history of psychology, you find that William James has a lot to say about free will. He said, when murders and treacheries cease to be sins, regrets are theoretic absurdities and errors. Murder and treachery cannot be good without regret being bad. Regret cannot be good without treachery and murder being bad. He considered both judgments of approval and regret as products of free will. By accepting determinism, one must accept pessimism also, according to him. Whereas there has been a lot of agitation by Bertrand Russell, who has written lots about it. He said, it has been said that man is a rational animal. All my life I have been searching for evidence which could support this. And he said he has never found it, that man is a rational animal. Now, when you look at human behavior, as students of psychology, we all start with the stimulus-response association. The question of free will is not a matter of concern as long as behavior is automatically initiated. There is no question of free will if behavior or response is automatically initiated. Now, stimulus-response association explains involuntary behavior. There is no scope for understanding free will, though. Now, there is a phenomenon called pre-attentive emotion. This is emotion to a stimulus without its perception and awareness. What does it mean? Emotion to a stimulus without perception. Pre-attentive emotions have shown that certain stimuli can elicit activation of the brain and experiences of associated emotions, including autonomic accompaniments from the brain without perception and awareness of the stimulus. Without perceiving, without being aware of it, the brain can directly respond emotionally to a stimulus. See, this is one of the diagrams that have been shown. I'll not go into the details. There have been many studies, and one of the most important study has been done by Ledox, and he calls it neural hijack. The response of the amygdala indicates the presence of a memory-based rather than a perception-based neural processing capability. Experience of fear can be aroused by external source without its perception and awareness. And you find that not one or two studies, there are dozens of studies which have shown the presence of pre-attentive emotion. What they did is they presented a fear-evoking stimulus using a functional MRI setup. They present the stimulus for about 30 to 40 milliseconds. You ask the subject will say, I have not seen anything, you have not presented anything. But at the same time, the subject is agitated. What is that? I am scared. He can't explain why, because he has not seen it. And that is when they found that the amygdala is activated during his presentation. So probably this is the origin of a stimulus-response association in the brain. Perception, etc. comes much, much later. Brain can respond to stimulus without perceiving it. Imagine in a larger context. Now, when it comes to brain-mind interface, pre-attentive emotions, we find that basic mind property of neural tissue, it may be the beginning point. Perception and awareness are properties which stem from brain at a later stage. Now there is the second stage. What happens in the second stage? This is something all psychology students know. See, if you look at the pre-attentive emotion, the first experiment was done demonstrated 1996. It's a very recent understanding that something like that existed. The second is a much older, familiar one. An unconditioned stimulus can elicit an unconditioned response. The conditioned theory, which we all know, Pavlov's theory, I don't have to spend any more time about it. But here also, the response is automatic. But you see the stimulus is perceived, and the response is automatically elicited. The perception is important phenomena in this. And now we have the third stage. That is, the stimulus is perceived, awareness of the stimulus is there, response or action internally initiated, awareness of, the person has awareness of intention. See, we have a potential which we have been measuring since mid-1980s. It is called the bright sharp potential or readiness potential. I'll just explain to you briefly. Here, the experiment is a very simple one. You give a button to a subject, a key, press button, and you tell him, you press this button whenever you wish to. It's for you to decide when you want to press. Press once in a while, but for you to decide when you want to press. There is no cue given to it. So he looks at it for some time, then puts his finger over that and just presses once. Then since he has to do the experiment, he will press again. But then this is what is called intentional action. If he presses it, it is because he has an intention to act. It's a typical intentional act. And what you find here is this. You get a potential like this. You get the point 0. You can see below, -1, 0. You look at this is a negativity going upward. There's a large negative peak. That's the point at which your subject has pressed. Right? That is the point at which the subject has pressed the key. And what do you find before that? There is so much of activity which has initiated from much earlier. You have. Wonderful, wonderful. Thank you. See here, you find that there is a notch occurring. There is a notch occurring. There is a notch occurring. Okay. you find that, then you find this is called the pre-motion activity. This is obtained from the premotor area. And you'll find that if I use my right hand, the activity is more on the left side, because the left premotor area is activated. Not premotor, motor area is activated. Now, interesting thing is that even before that, there is a negativity. Negativity starts from here. And we call this, from here to here we call it negativity, negative shift 1. From here to here we call negative shift 2. It was shown by people, not in my experiment in 1986. I didn't even know that I am looking at a phenomenon like this. It was 1989. A scientist called Libet said that during this negative shift, negativity 2, that's the time when you have the urge to act. Okay? You have the urge to act. But the activity has actually started from somewhere here. The intentional activity has started from here. Your awareness of the same occurs only somewhere here. What does it mean? You call it intentional act, you call it a free will. He said that there is no free will. The activity has started even before you are aware of it. It's only in between, somewhere on the way, you are becoming aware of it. It has its origin much earlier. And this was the first time free will was questioned and challenged by scientists in this context. See, this is a typical example. See, this is the negative shift from here to here. You are not aware of it. It's an intentional action and activity has started, but you are not aware that activity has been initiated. If this is not there, this will not happen. Only somewhere here you have an urge, which you are aware of. And it was found that you are unaware of your intentional act for about 350 milliseconds. For about 350 milliseconds, you are unaware of the intentional act. Not one or two small little milliseconds. These are the recordings taken in our lab. I will not go into it. Now, I will not go to it. This is a debate study. I found that 1885 and later, the later years he came out with the theory supporting it. Libet showed that volitional process started at least 350 milliseconds before the conscious wish to act is experienced by the individual. And then there have been many studies. There has been recently a study in 2008. He said that you are not aware of for about 1.42 seconds. You become aware of it only about 1.5 seconds later. The so-called intentional activity is initiated. And there is another study, again in 2008, he demonstrated that they found predictive neural activation using fMRI in frontopolar cortex, that posterior cingulate cortex almost 7 seconds before the subject awareness of motor distribution. You call it intentional act, but the act has been initiated 7 seconds before. And where do you call it intentional act? Then what is it? See, behavior is evoked automatically by an external stimulus, as in pre-attentive emotion, by the presence of a need state which may have survival or emotional value, and by self-created thoughts and thoughts induced from outside. Now comes some very important aspects. What is meant by intention? Automatic initiation of an act may be initiated by emotions which serves as the driving force in the individual. And what you find here is that there is an emphasis on awareness. That only only the problem is that awareness originates somewhere later. This is what I would request actually Dr. Mahendra Sharma, who is interested in mindfulness. Probably, if you train people in mindfulness, you may find that the awareness may proceed, their non-awareness state may become shorter, but you'll have to virtually demonstrate that. It would be a very, very interesting and provocative study if you can show that mindfulness has a direct effect on increasing the depth of awareness. After all, that's what mindfulness is all about, awareness. Yeah. Now I am coming to something more interesting. See, when you look at behavior, that, look at it, very interesting. If you have a 5-year-old child, see, I'm going a little slow because it's a difficult area, but you have to stop, please. If you have a 5-year-old child and you give him a hammer, what will the child say? What will the child do? The child would say, everything in the house needs hammering. He will hammer absolutely everything. See that? Everything in the house needs hammering. That means behavior is initiated by itself. You don't have to intentionally initiate behavior. Look at the implication, okay? Behavior is initiated during intention also by itself. Automatically it is initiated. It is just that somewhere in between you become aware of. When you look at our own life, you find that you have to travel. You find you are going somewhere. The question is that you become aware that you are traveling. That's when you can decide, all right, where you are going. I can run from here, fall down there and die, or I can decide, all right, I'll go to Jaipur airport, or I'll go to Delhi, or I'll go to Bangalore. And you find that if I have 3 choices, each choice has its own influence effect on me. I would love to go to Bangalore, that's my home. So you may find that that's what I choose. But that is not free will. Because I have a greater effect for that particular choice. On the other hand, you may also find that even though going to Bangalore is my first choice, I decide the second choice, I will go to Delhi. Because if I go to Delhi and meet some people, that will be advantageous for me. In another 6 months, I may find some benefit for that. You get it? This is not truly free will. But then we have the ability to make such choices. Well, now what is happening about the 5-year-old child? See, we all are familiar with ADHD condition. You say that, yeah. Okay. The hyperactive child. Why the child is hyperactive? You find that a very important phenomenon in the brain doesn't grow in the brain. It is not cultivated. What we call response inhibition. If I give you a hammer, you don't hit because you inhibit that urge to hammer everywhere. If you are not inhibited that, I and you also will go around hammering every place saying that all these require hammering. We have learned to inhibit. Response inhibition is a very, very important phenomenon of the brain. It is through response inhibition we learn to inhibit a response that has been already initiated, delay it, or produce it at a time of your choice. And the interesting thing is that response inhibition doesn't cultivate in the brain just like that. It's not that you are born with response inhibition. You are born with the hammering child. There is no response inhibition. response inhibition has to be cultivated. It has to be cultivated. Now, there are 3-4 important response inhibition systems. I'll not go into the details of it because I want to come to something more interesting. That means there is an unconscious beginning of the so-called conscious acts. Oh, no, I was going back. This is the place I want to stop now. I want to spend a few minutes here. See, when you speak of positive psychology, what is that you are doing? See, yesterday, the other day, when Dr. Christine Henry talked to us, he told us about 2 major principles. He was looking at it from a psychotherapeutic point of view, right? He said that you look at the problems the person facing, look at the intensiveness, the extensiveness of the problem, and then you study the ability of the subject, the assets and liabilities of the subject to solve the problem. I cannot find a solution for this problem in my life at all. But then what can I do? I can take one step, one small step. And then I can become aware that I have taken that one small step. Somebody will take the other steps. And I can take that one step happily. I can take that one step in a positive manner. That is positive psychology. And similarly, he also said something more, very, very important. He said in a psychotherapeutic situation, you have to be conscious of the future, what you are going to accomplish in the future. Your thoughts, 50% of your thoughts should be centered around the future. That's where I would say that probably it's not in a regular positive behavior, it's not 50%, it may be much more. I don't know if you are familiar with, I'm sure the business school people may be aware of, the famous Pandit Peter Singh. You know, he's the man who coined the term, cultivated the concept of learning organization. Personally, I would say, very personally, I would say that his book, Fifth Discipline, I consider a lot more valuable than Bhagavad Gita. Let me be very honest. That's my opinion. I'm sure that I'm sure you don't have to agree with me. Okay, that's fine. But I find that the things he has said in that book are much, much more precious. He said that don't look into your past. It is almost like, the Buddhist. Past is not going to teach you anything. All that you learn is not to make the same mistake. But what do you do with the present? Don't leave the present for the present. Then you are again gone. Use your present to build your future. You create your future in the present. The future can be created only in your present. That's when true learning takes place. Right? And how do we do that? And that's where you find that it is not, from a neuroscientist point of view, it is not done in a vacuum. Only thing is that every function associated with this has to be cultivated by a growing brain. A brain, 5-year-old brain may be able to cultivate it. A 50-year-old brain may be able to cultivate it. Even if you are 70 years, you may be able to cultivate it. There is no time limitation that your time to learn is over. No. And here you find that there are 3 systems. System 1, System 2, System 3. What are these 3 systems? I'll come to the next one. This is a very simplified description of that. You have emotion redefined as desire to achieve, learn, and perform. That is, the emotional drive, the drive is there within you, and the drive expresses itself. What you can do with your drive is to define the drive. You can learn to give it a definition, you can mold it to give it a shape. If you don't want to do it, you don't do it. You can become a psychopath. But the drive is there and the drive is expressed. So this art of learning to define your emotion has to be cultivated. Then you have to cultivate, then you find that once you do that, you use this desire. Desire is redefined as motivation. That's what we define as motivation and use. That's when you set goals and you have action plans, rational, strategic tactics, and then you have acquisition of skills, all that follow. Let me come to the next one. See, there is a system called, there are three major functional systems in the frontal cortex. One is called the anterior cingulate system. This is the system responsible for drive, emotion, initiation of self-preserving actions, emotional controls, ability to abstain from emotion even in pain, emotional control of speech, response inhibition, response selection. This part of the brain, you can cultivate these functions in this part of the brain. Whether you have learned to cultivate or not, it is left to your own lifestyle, whether you have learned it or not. Not that just because you are born, you are 50 years old or 20 years old, you have all this function. No. You have to cultivate. And that becomes a part of positive psychology. You teach people, that's what you were telling. Positivism, look at it from a larger perspective. Don't look at it. I mean, here we are not looking at the mental health problem. You are not looking at the clinical psychology problem. You are looking at the healthy mind, how the healthy mind has to grow. And then there is another system, the orbitofrontal system. What you call your personality, your social behavior, spontaneous arousal of attention, motivation, ability to focus attention, initiating behavior, goal-directed purposeful behavior, inappropriate emotion and behavior, control of that, change in mental state, all these are controlled by this system. Again, these controls have to be acquired, cultivated. Not that just because you are 10 years old, you have all these things. No. Presently, we have no means of knowing how much the person has cultivated these functions. If you are a 15-year-old person, how much this 15-year-old boy has cultivated these functions. We have no means of knowing this. Yeah, I'm just finishing, right? And the last one is the dorsolateral. This is related to organization, the actual execution of behavior. I'll not go into the details, but then this system is also very, very important. Now, whatever that you say about positive psychology, you find that is about reconfiguring this system within you. You are aware of this or not, it doesn't matter. Even without knowing this, you can practice your positive psychology. But if you want, you can understand it and say that there are different specific brain systems which are associated with these things, with these states, and they need to be cultivated. Each of those functions needs to be cultivated. That art of cultivating should become the part of lifestyle or the major index of the society, the art of cultivation. It's not, I don't say it is not there, but then now we are more conscious of it. We are more conscious of it, and we believe that it can be monitored in a better manner in people. Thank you. I'll stop here.